Welcome to Even Tacos Fall Apart, a podcast where we explore mental health one story at a time. I'm MommaFoxFire, and I am really glad you're here with me today. This episode jumps straight into a topic that hits home for so many of us: kids, parenting, and mental health. Whether you're raising a child who's struggling with anxiety, ADHD, autism, learning differences, or you're just trying to figure out what's going on and how to help, this one is for you. Parenting is hard. Full stop. And when your kid is wired a little differently, or the tools you are told to use just don't work, that difficulty multiplies. A lot of us are out here trying our best without enough support, feeling like we're getting it wrong, or watching our kids struggle and wondering what we missed. And too often, people around us don't get it, including the systems we're supposed to rely on for help. Today, I'm talking with Leanne Tran, a registered psychologist who's spent her career working with kids and families. She's one of those people who just gets it. Leanne brings not only her clinical knowledge, but also a whole lot of heart into her work, especially when it comes to helping kids who don't fit neatly into the box school or society expects them to. In this conversation, we talk about the common misunderstandings around behavior and neurodivergence, what support actually looks like for families, how schools can help or harm, and why early intervention matters. We also talk about how hard it can be to find the right help, especially in rural areas or when resources are limited, and how parents can start where they are, even when things feel messy and overwhelming. Leanne shares practical advice, but she also offers a lot of reassurance. Because if you've ever felt like maybe your parenting style doesn't work because your kid's just too much, or if you've been told their behavior is just a discipline issue when you know there's something more going on, you're not alone, and it's not your fault. I'm not going to pretend this conversation has all the answers, but it's real, it's thoughtful, and it's full of insight that might just shift the way you think about parenting and what your child really needs. I'm grateful to Leanne for her time and her honesty, and I think you'll get a lot out of this one, whether you're parenting a child with a diagnosis or just trying to be more mindful about how mental health shows up in families. So let's get into it. This is my conversation with Leanne Tran on children, parenting, and mental health. Excellent. Hello and welcome to another Mental Health Monday here on Even Tacos Fall Apart. I am so glad you're here for the very first Mental Health Monday interview of 2025, which is wild to me. I can't believe that it's already 2025, but I'm very excited for our topic tonight. We're going to be talking about children, parenting, and mental health. And if you are interested in asking any questions while we are live, feel free to pop those questions into the chat. We do have a question queue open, and that is just !Q. Follow with your question. We'll get them in there, and we'll get them asked while we're live. Thank you guys for being here. Thanks for your participation. As always, ask away. Children are bad for mental health. End of convo. I mean, listen, sometimes. Fortunately, though, this conversation is going to be more than that because I am joined by Leanne Tran. So, Leanne, thank you for being here because clearly this conversation would go off the rails if I did not have you here. So thank you for agreeing to join me today.
You're welcome. I will try my best to stay on track.
Oh, you don't have to stay on track because we never stay on track here, so it's just fine. But let me tell you guys a little bit about Leanne, and then we'll kind of dive into the interview here. So Leanne is a registered psychologist who began her career working with children and families and has loved it ever since. Families see Leanne for assessments to understand autism, ADHD, specific learning disorders, among other things. She has found that there are always people waiting to access support, especially in rural areas. That is a hard word for me. As a result, Leanne provides online information for parents about what children need for development, how this can be adapted for kids developing differently, and practical implementation strategies. And if you are looking to connect with Leanne, I've got a couple of links for you, along with a link to some of those free resources for parents. So if you would like to click through, connect, with any of these, feel free to look at the website, go to Facebook, go to the YouTube, or click through to those free resources as well. So Leanne, again, thank you just for taking the time out today and joining us here.
You're so welcome.
And we do have just a very slight delay on the line, so no worries because we're not afraid of a little bit of silence. But we're gonna work through that, and if it gets any worse, we will get that figured out. I called it did I say the YouTube? I'm old now. I mean, listen, sometimes you just gotta say things like the YouTube and the Google.
Yeah.
I can't help it, you know. We were just talking about before this, we were just talking about threads being the newest social media thing. And I'm like, I'm still not used to using it. Very old person kind of thing. I'm not used to using it. It's new and blah, blah, blah. So, yeah. So, Leanne, can you tell us a little bit more about your experiences and what made you become interested in your specialization, especially the piece where you help the younger generations avoid the trauma experienced by previous generations? I think that part's really fascinating. So how'd you get into all of this?
Yeah, it's interesting. I wanted to be a teacher all through school and then seemed to change my mind late high school and think about psychology. But there are actually a lot of parallels, I think, and I've ended up in my role doing a lot of teaching, but it's about things like life skills, and I teach kids lots of that stuff, and I teach parents as well. Um, but I have a slight physical disability with my hip, and I think for me, that's what gave me this feeling always growing up that I wasn't quite the same as everyone else. I couldn't quite do the same things other kids could do. And then I think when I found a job working with kids, initially they had my job was with kids with physical disabilities. I found this real connection of being able to understand and also wanting to help those kids kind of find their way through those challenges, and to become, well, not, I was going to say become the best version of themselves. That sounds so, it's not really like that with kids. It's just about meeting them where they're at and helping them through challenging situations so that they can be happy and do what they want to do. Um, and then from there, I guess I started working for myself in private practice, and then most kids who came my way were kids with ADHD and autism and learning disorders, and that's what I really enjoy, helping. I guess I help kids be able to find just different ways of doing things so that they can find success. But I also help parents do the same, do parenting a little bit differently so that it's much more effective, because often the typical parenting strategies don't work for kids who develop differently. Yeah, so and I just love kids. They're fun, they're funny, they're interesting. So I really enjoy every day.
It's interesting to hear you say, you know, you wanted to be a teacher and then you kind of went into psychology. So my oldest has maintained that he wants to be a teacher, but he's also flirted with the idea of psychology as well. And he's like, I really want to take this psychology class. He's in high school still. I really want to take this psychology class because I think it'll be interesting. And I'm like, you know, teaching in psychology, they really, especially if you want to work with kids, if that's what you want to do, they really are
Mm,
kind of two sides of that same coin as far as you're educating, but you're right, you're in a kind of unique position to educate parents as a psychologist that you wouldn't necessarily be in as a teacher. And I,
yeah, that's true.
yeah, so my youngest has Tourette syndrome and also ADHD. And that's one of the things that I appreciate about his doctor is that his doctor, first of all, talks to him on a very direct level, which is wonderful. He's not talking over him or anything like that. But then he makes sure to take the time
Hmm.
to also speak to me separately. Be like, okay,
Mm,
this is what you need to know about what you're dealing with specifically. Then he's like, all right, mom, what do you need? How are you doing? Here's some things that you can read through and those kinds of things. And it really, really does help whenever you're in that position to be able to say, okay, I understand that what this kid is going through, and also now I can help the parent too. So I appreciate what you do for sure.
That's good. I'm so glad because kids are really different than adults because adults are in charge of their own lives, but
Hmm.
kids aren't yet. So you can't really help a child without also helping the people surrounding them.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Bite Mark says 1,000% learning about teaching helps with psychology, and learning about psychology helps with teaching. Yes, yeah, most definitely.
Mm,
I feel like the learning part of that, the education part of that, uh, you're gonna benefit from a little bit of both in your degree.
yes.
Uh,
Yeah.
for sure. Well, we do have a question in the question queue. Bite Mark would like to know, what is your favorite poem?
I was worried about that question because I don't think I have one. If it was, what's your favorite book? I could probably talk for half an hour, but yeah, poem, I'm not so sure. I do like well, I was thinking about it because there's a local artist here in Brisbane where I live who makes pottery with her own um poetry on it.
Oh, that's
But
cool.
she has yeah, it's very cool. But one of them is an Oscar Wilde quote, which is something about we are all in the gutters, but some of us are looking at the stars. We are all in the gutter, but some of us are looking at the stars. And I really like that quote because I think it's a lot of, I don't know, being a psychologist, I guess it's the natural interest I have in perspective or how we think about things and thinking about how to try and find the strength in any situation by looking at the stars really spoke to me. So it's a bit of a cheat. It's a quote rather than an actual poem.
That's okay. We very widely, very broadly, very generously interpret the word poem. So, poem could be a song, it could be a Bible verse. We don't get very many Bible verses here, but it could be a quote. A quote from an author is just fine. Sometimes it's just what speaks to you about someone's work, and that's good.
Mm,
I love that you say you could talk for half an hour about books because I was just noticing when we were starting, and I wish I had noticed it before we started, but I'm gonna say it now. I love that your bookshelf is organized by color behind you. I think that's really nice looking.
thank you. This is a product of we were talking before about how in Australia the it's summer now. So we've just had Christmas, but we're in the middle of our long summer holiday, and January is the time when we all seem to declutter and deorganize, or reorganize. So I've just last week kind of gone through and redone that. So thank you for appreciating the hard work.
It looks great. I mean, listen, I in no way, shape, or form am going to reorganize my bookshelf by color because that's an undertaking that I don't want to do. But I always appreciate it when other people do. Like, and it's fascinating to me. Sometimes it's by color, sometimes it's by author, sometimes it's by like genre. Here's a shelf of this type of book, and I love all
Mhm.
of the different ways of organizing books, including I myself just have small piles of books all over the place. So there's that. Uh, it's Bite Mark says it's
Yes,
much more of a
I do
getting
too,
to know
but
you
they're all off
question.
camera.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You don't want the little. I mean, mine aren't. I've got a
Yeah,
stack
yes.
right there. There's probably another stack that. Let's see. Can you see any? There's just that one. So we could pretend like that's my only stack of books. It's definitely not. And I did just combine one of my stacks of books into a single. Well, it's still stacked next to each other, but I now have one part of my house that's just like these books I haven't read yet. These are
Hmm.
my read these next, stop
Yep.
buying books. Ah,
Yep. I think that buying books and reading books are two separate hobbies,
they
right?
absolutely are. Absolutely. I am I love my Kindle. I love to read books because it's so convenient. You can take it wherever. And if you finish your book and you're out and about and you don't have access to your stack of books that you haven't read, you can just download a new book. And that gets me into so much
Hmm.
trouble so often because I'm like, yes, I will just download another book. No, I haven't read any of the books on my on my stack. What kinds of books do you
Yep,
enjoy?
yep, I can relate. Uh, someone asked me this at a lunch I was at recently, and I said books that are about intergenerational kind of traumatic patterns. And then I realized that was too much for this like get to know you lunch kind of thing. But for me, it's those books that tell stories about generations through
Mm,
families, and so fiction or literary fiction, but ones that have that deep kind of exploration of people and relationships and how things get passed down and how choices we make as to how to share things and treat people kind of affects our you know yeah generations of people and that kind of thing. Really about rich experiences and yeah, characters, I guess.
yeah. Okay, I do have a book recommendation for you if you haven't already read it, but A Woman is No Man. I'll have to look up the author for that one. I read it
Okay.
last year, I think. It was very good. And if it's the one that I'm thinking of, I actually better make sure that that's the right that that's the right one.
Okay.
Yes, it is. It's by Etaf Rum, Etaf Rum, Rum. It's about a
Okay.
Palestinian American family, and it talks about this Arab family living in America, but it goes from that story back to the mother's story, back to the grandmother's story as well. And it's just very well written, and it kind of deals with that history repeating itself, kind of generational thing, and how there winds up being this one
Mm.
kind of trauma breaker eventually. So it's wonderful, wonderful book. If you haven't read it, highly recommend. So what is your favorite thing about working in the mental health field, and what are some of the biggest challenges that you've found?
I think my favorite thing is being able to change the path that a child might be on, because there is, I guess, with the research that we have about children and their development, there is sometimes a predictable path that kids can go down if they do have challenges. So with ADHD and anxiety, it's really common that then there'll be as a secondary thing to that, there'll be anxiety and then
Mm-hmm.
maybe even depression later on. And so that's a predictable path that I don't want kids to go down. And so being able to help with things like teaching about emotions and regulating emotions, and even for kids to be able to advocate for themselves, get the support they need at school, I feel like changes the patterns or
Mm.
path that a child can be on, and that's probably my favorite part about it. I think the biggest challenge is when there's not a lot of resources around a child. That's difficult. So, say for example, a school that's not really on board or viewing a child's behavior as a choice or a personality trait rather than them trying to achieve what trying to meet their own needs
Mm-hmm.
basically. Or maybe it's we Australia's a big place. There's a lot in rural areas, there's lots of people living, but they don't have access to things like psychologists or speech pathologists or tutors even, so that's
Mm.
really tricky. But and part of why I've been shifting to do things online and also link with other people who do similar things online, so that then parents, no matter where they live, can access the support they need to help their kids.
Yeah, yeah. I, so I'm in Texas, and Texas has a lot of rural areas as well, where it is difficult to access some things. It is getting better, but especially during COVID, it was a big challenge to get everyone the kind of care that they needed. And I know that that opened up a lot of things where you were
Mhm.
allowed to do services, because previously, at least in the US, a lot of things weren't allowed to do things online and still bill it under health insurance. And so now that's a lot better. But of course,
Mm.
that's always going to be a challenge. There's going to be the challenge of that. And were it not for being able to find things online, I think that would be a much larger struggle. Do you have a true crime story that
Yeah,
fascinates
that's
you?
right. I do. Um, I have been I listened, maybe it was a year or so ago, but in Australia here, there was a podcast, and it was called, oh, I'm going to have to look at it to remember, The Sure Thing. And so this podcast was telling the true crime story is basically about two men, and one of them worked for the Australian Bureau of Statistics. It was an insider trading kind of
Ooh.
true crime. So not, yeah, the not the traditional one, but
Mm-hmm.
my husband and I were both hooked to this episode. Um, and because what happened is that, yeah, someone had inside information about, statistics about unemployment, told a school friend from, that he'd known years ago at a party, who then did some currency trading and made millions of dollars from it. But what was so fascinating was the psychology or the characters involved. It didn't go well, and they both ended up in prison. But the guy who leaked the information responded really differently to the guy who did all the trading and made the money. And they did share it, but the guy who was doing the trading kind of had this really big, like, you can't catch me kind of personality. And
Uh,
he even bought a house with some of the money from. We have a renovation TV show in Australia called The Block. I don't know if you have that too, but no, it's kind of a competition. People renovate and then the houses go up for auction. And so he bought one of the houses on national TV in this auction, with all these kind of money that he'd bought through illegal insider trading. So it's really kind of taunting and um, felt untouchable. And the other guy though, who was ended up going to jail just for giving the information out, um, really like made peace with the whole situation, and was, what's the word? Kind of, it took responsibility for what he
mm,
had done, and really thought, well, I deserve it, so I'm happy to be here, and made peace with the person who had dobbed him in, and really like dealt with it in a way that he had no qualms about paying the price for what he'd done and learning
yeah.
from it and moving forward, which is really in contrast um, to the other guy. But so yeah, really, really interesting one. And I never thought I would be hooked on. Um, it was by the as financial newspaper here, the Financial Review. I never thought I would be hooked on one of their podcasts, but it happened. It was really interesting.
Yeah, that sounds really interesting. Did the podcast only cover that one story, or do they cover a different story every season or something like that?
No, it was just one
Nice.
season, just about this
Oh,
particular
that's cool.
situation. Yeah.
Just a super deep dive into it. That's really neat. Well, if anyone's interested, there is
Yep.
a link down in the chat. So feel free to go give that a listen when
Oh,
you're done listening
that was
here.
quick.
Yeah. Yeah, I try to just look stuff up so that people can do it. I'll have to look up that TV show too, because I haven't heard of that, but it sounds interesting. How bold to be like
Yeah.
publicly spending this money and on something really big.
Yeah, that's right. And kind of already knowing that the police were around because the other guy had already gotten into trouble. So,
Oh, wow.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah,
Um,
that's big.
yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
getting back to our topic tonight, which is parenting and children and mental health, what are some key things that parents should know about child development, especially if they have a child who might be developing a little bit differently?
I think the key things are, we can't really predict the future or plan ahead where our kids are going to end up. But my advice to parents is to always just think about what is the next right thing that their kids need, um, and to try to understand that behavior and whether that's challenges and even
All right, we'll get her back in just a second. Bear with me. From Texas to Australia is a long distance for the internet waves to travel. You know, sometimes they have to go really far. Hopefully she's not having like storms or anything. Am I online? I'm online. I'm glad you can see and hear me. That's always my worry is that I'm like, you're having connection issues, but no, it's just me. Sometimes it is just me. If I'm not online, there's some magic happening. Look, I'm just a magical, mystical being. Okay, I'm magic. So let's get it on here and see if we can get it to work. But I have you back,
okay.
and I can hear you. So
Yeah.
hopefully that's the hardest part is just making sure that we're both here.
Yeah.
And fortunately, everyone who's here in the audience is used to me having some sort of technical difficulties because that is my life.
think you don't have to pivot in mid-session.
Yep. I mean, sometimes you just gotta.
Yeah.
Right. Well, I think we can just probably just pop kind of back in where we were, but give me a second because I got to pull some things up on my own screen to make sure that we're good. uh,
Sure.
I think we're good.
Awesome. Okay.
Excellent. All right. So I think we kind of left off. We were talking about kind of just how children develop differently and some kind of key things that people should know. So maybe we can just start that question and that answer kind of over again, just as far as if a parent notices that their child is maybe developing a little bit differently, or what are some things to look for whenever you're a parent and you're just observing your child a little bit.
Yeah, I think I mean, we don't want to compare our kids to other kids in an unhelpful way, but sometimes comparing them to what seems usual or typical for other kids their age is a good guide to follow. And so an example might be if your kids are school aged, how does what they're, for example, their attention span or how good they are at following instructions, how does that compare to other kids of the same age? Teachers are really great to be able to ask those questions because they've got the whole class to be able to get a gauge of what's expected or not. And that's often the hardest bit for parents, I think, is knowing what to expect. Or for young kids, if you're part of a play group or a mother's group or something like that, you can get a gauge of what other kids do at what stages and
Mm-hmm.
use that as a bit of a guide. But I think too, if parents are worried, there's no harm in going and just talking it through with someone, whether that's your family doctor or a psychologist or somebody else, just to you know, ask those questions. Is this what I should expect or is it different? And you'll at the best you'll get peace of mind, but the other outcome might be that then what you've got a bit of an idea your child might be developing differently and you can start putting things in place to help them out.
Yeah, and from my personal experience, also once you go in and you do talk to someone, it is that confirmation of like, okay, I'm not going crazy. I actually did understand what was going on, and now I have had someone else who knows what they're talking about confirm it. But also, it opens you up to now I can find the right resources online. Now I can make sure that I'm connecting with other parents. If it's something like Tourette syndrome, you can connect with other parents kids who are going through something similar and compare experiences. Because yeah, you don't really want to compare your kid especially with something that has this broad range of things that kids can go through
Hmm.
and develop completely differently. Like some kids, they reach the age of 9 to 14 and it goes away entirely. Some kids reach that age and it's going to stick through adulthood. So you never want to be like, oh, well, so and so has the same thing going on and they're. So yeah, it's a little bit of a balance there too. But it does open you up a lot more, like we were talking about earlier, to those online resources and ways to I guess confirm as a parent that you're not, just absolutely making it all up in your head.
Hmm. The other thing too, I think, is that parents can think it's just them, it's their parenting. I mean, I don't know if you found this, but I think Tourette's is maybe a little bit different because it's something that's perhaps more easy to observe
Yeah.
than other things like inattention, if that's ADHD. But parents can just think that they're not quite doing it right. And going to talk to somebody can really get rid of that fear for lots of parents as well.
Yeah. That was actually one of my biggest drivers in going to get an official diagnosis. Was my ex was punishing for his tics, and listen, there's many reasons why he's an ex, but he
Hmm.
was punishing our child who was 4 for these things that he clearly had no control over. And I was like, I know he doesn't have control over. And he was very insistent that no, he has control over the noises that he makes. He has control over what his hands are doing. And so part of my motivation was to go in and kind of get that confirmation and say what is going on. And then the other part of it was a little bit of the ADHD kind of thing that I was noticing, which is one of those things that like you can cover a lot of stuff under a Tourette's umbrella that
Hmm.
include the things that would be helpful for ADHD. And so just working with my doctor on like those kind, or working with his doctor on the kind of what things can we get those accommodations for, what things are going to help, what things are not helpful. Yeah, it's a huge help. It's a huge help to just have that information, be armed with that information, and be able to move forward with that confirmation a little bit.
Yeah, definitely.
Are there any common misconceptions that parents might have about things that are a little bit more on the side of being a nuance or of maybe not being necessarily physically noticeable, like autism or ADHD or other developmental differences? Any common misconceptions there?
There are a lot of misconceptions. But I mean, I think what you touched on is one of the biggest ones, that people often think that behavior is a choice that kids can control. Um, and it's not that simple.
Yeah.
But the other thing too is that I feel like people with ADHD too, lots of the times people, because it means, if somebody has trouble paying attention and they're forgetful and that kind of thing, they can do things like maybe not do what they're told and not remember the rules and all of that kind of stuff, and people can begin to attribute it kind of to someone's personality or characteristics, that they just don't care, or they're not they're just not a good kid, basically. And so that's a really big misconception, I think, with ADHD. And if kids start getting those messages that, you never do what you're told, you never listen, it starts to form their identity in some way, because they're constantly being told that's who they are.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, so there's always some kind of underlying um, skill that a child might just not have yet, that is the key to helping them move forward, or there's some underlying need that they aren't getting met that's the reason for the behavior. Yeah.
Yeah, trying to figure out, is it something I haven't taught my kid yet, or is it something that they're truly having a challenge with despite the opportunity to learn something or anything like that. That's hard. That's a hard thing to kind of try to figure out, especially on your own.
It is. Yeah, absolutely. And there are lots of things that parents say to me, are things like, is this because of ADHD, or is this a normal 9-year-old boy? I don't know. And that's really tricky to know. Um, and so and then is it intentional or is it
Mm,
a result of some needs? Because kids will intentionally do the wrong thing
yeah.
sometimes. No one's perfect. So teasing that out is a lot of what we do, because I think then that's the key to kind of feeling more confident and in control of what's happening. If you feel like you've got an understanding of which things to pay attention to, you know, yeah, what skills to work on, how to respond to behavior, and um, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Are there now when my youngest was diagnosed, it was like we went into the neurologist. We sat there. The neurologist talked to me for a while, like, why are you here? What's going on? Let's talk about it. And by the time he was done talking to me for 5 minutes, he was like, I can tell you what this is because I've been observing him. Like, that's easy.
Right.
He's like, I've heard the vocal tics, I've seen the physical tics. I know what this is. Here you go. The other things that you're talking about that I couldn't necessarily see, I think what you're describing very greatly fits with ADHD. And over
Mhm.
time, it's just like gotten stronger. Like, yes, okay, now we've definitely confirmed. Started when he was started with with this doctor when he was 4, and since then it's just been like, yeah, every year we just confirm. so,
Mhm.
so
Mhm.
it's a lot easier to diagnose things when you can physically see things. It's a lot harder whenever it is something like ADHD because that's not something that a doctor can just go, I'm talking to your mom. You're sitting over here and quietly playing on the exam table while I'm talking to her. I can't necessarily see that this is that. So, are there
Mm.
challenges with assessing and diagnosing autism and ADHD and other learning disorders, especially in underserved communities as well?
Yeah, they can be. Sometimes I can see ADHD though, for sure.
Fair.
But it depends on the type, and it's usually if there's hyperactivity, or I'll often, in fact, it happened yesterday. We'll be, say, 5 minutes into an interview with a family, and the child's up going, "Can I have something to do?" Because sitting still and being bored is really hard. Um, but the thing is too, with ADHD and with autism, both of those conditions, are the diagnostic criteria is based on behavior. So it
Mm,
still has to be a measure of behavior. But what we do is observe the child, but also get parent and teacher points of view as well, usually by questionnaires that because I think the biggest challenge is with kids who potentially seem different in different settings. And so the common one is with kids with ADHD, they're really trying to hold things in while they're at school, and then they come home and their behavior's wildly different. And the teachers say, he's a model student, and the parents are like at their wits' end. The same can be true with autism as well, because there's lots of masking so that kids know what's expected of them at school. They don't feel comfortable to do what they need to do to regulate, whether that's, moving around the classroom or using some sensory fidgets or having time out from the noise. And then it's a lot harder in the afternoons. Um, so yeah, that's probably one of the biggest difficulties, but I work with a team and we try to always just take all of the information to build a bigger picture. We don't need to see it be the same in every
mm,
circumstance. We just need to build it all together to have a picture of what's happening for that child. Learning disorders, I feel like, are a little easier because I can measure them with tests and IQ tests and things like spelling tests and that kind of stuff, and you have some numbers then to work with, which makes it a little bit clearer. But again, then in underserved areas, I think it's the access to support. And so what I find is that kids might be diagnosed with things later because they haven't had that um, I guess those conversations or early support.
mm.
And so what happens then is maybe it's not just ADHD or autism, or not just a learning disorder, but those things plus some anxiety or something else by the time kids are in those tween to teen years if they haven't had that early support. So that's hard for me to see, because I think all kids deserve the opportunity to have the support they need.
Do you think that anxiety is somewhat preventable in kids if if they had gotten that support earlier, or kids who are able to get that support earlier, do they have less anxiety generally, or is it just a kind of it's going to come at some point? If it's going to show up, it's going to show up, or
Yeah, I think it varies a lot. I think for some kids, if it's, it may always have been going to show up.
yeah.
And because these things are genetic as well, like things like anxiety and um, other mood difficulties. So for some kids, it may be coming anyway. But if they've got more skills to handle emotions by the time it comes, that's a good thing as well. But for some kids, I do think it could be prevented, and it's
Mm,
usually that's what my goal, I guess, is when you mentioned at the beginning that what I want to do is try to help kids so they don't feel as or experience as much trauma as previous generations. And from my point of view, that with ADHD and autism is usually about a mismatch between what a child needs and then what they're getting from home and from school. And it's that if they never kind of feeling understood and supported because there's that mismatch, I think that's the kind of thing that can create anxiety that would be preventable if kids had the right support.
yeah. It's interesting to hear you talk about the difference in like school behavior and home behavior, or just other environment behavior also, because it's not always, they're perfect at school and wild at home, because
Mm,
my 11-year-old, he'll come home from his dad's and his tics will be just off the charts. And I'm like, I
mhm,
know, because I have spoken to his doctor about it. I know that's because he has suppressed them for so long, and now he's like, okay, finally, I can release
mhm,
them a little bit. And there, to an extent, that also happens with school, but fortunately his school is very good about, they've got a plan in place. He's got accommodations in the classroom, and all of his teachers are aware of, like, all right, if he's having a bad tick day, here are the things that are going to help him. So he feels a little safer at school even to express his tics in the way that they need to be. But yeah, if
mhm.
he's had to suppress them for a while, he's going to get home and he's going to have what I would consider a bad day. Now for him, a bad day is a bad tick day, and that sucks. But for someone who is really suppressing something like autism or ADHD, or having to mask in those kinds of ways, it could be really easy for a parent to misunderstand that as misbehavior versus like, I'm in a safe space to express what I need to express. And
Mm.
that's so hard to kind of wrap your head around, because yeah, parents are exhausted sometimes by it.
Yeah, absolutely. It is really hard for lots of parents to get their head around, but because I think it, like you've explained it, that someone's explained it to you and you can
Yeah.
understand it, and that's fantastic. Some parents can do that. Some parents can't quite get there
Yeah.
to understand it. But I think even if you understand it, it's still difficult to
Yes.
experience. And I've had parents say to me, but how am I meant to be calm and loving when someone's being not nice to me? Because it's often about what see as like emotional dysregulation, which might mean tantrums and meltdowns,
Yeah.
and it's yelling, and it's, quick reactions and overreactions. And then the child wants a hug to help them calm down. And parents say, like, how do I get to the place where I can give that hug?
Yeah.
So yeah, understanding it, but then also, feeling into it is a different story as
Hmm.
well.
Yeah. Yeah, that can be impossible. It can
Yeah.
feel impossible to be like, I know
Yeah.
what you need. Am I capable of providing that right now? Those are two entirely separate questions. I recognize what you
Yeah.
need. I don't know if I can provide it. Those can
Yeah.
exist at the same time. It's really hard.
Mm.
So, how can parents balance their child's unique needs while also trying to foster this resilience in them and maybe even a sense of independence in their child? How does that work?
I think sometimes, it's going to sound simple because I think the advice always sounds simple, but it's
Yeah.
putting it in place that's the tricky part. Um, it's just about working out what kids need, I think. And so it's trying to provide the just right level of support. And that means supporting just enough so that your kids can do things, but not too much so that they don't learn skills and independence. Um, Psychologists often use this. The word's not coming to me now, but it's basically like the slow and steady approach. And so if you think about challenging your kids to learn new skills and be independent, having them take a small step is a lot easier than having them take a giant leap. And so if you can just let them have the small steps towards independence and doing things more and more on their own, they will get there. And they might get there behind where their peers get there, but that's okay. They're going to get there in the end anyway. So it's kind of about providing support for the things that they can't do independently yet,
Mm.
while still teaching the skills and giving them opportunities to get there in their own time.
Yeah, that definitely sounds
Yeah.
simple.
Yeah, it does, doesn't it?
Uh,
Yeah.
I think it's easy to say like, well, this is what you need to do, and it's much harder to put into place, and that's true for a lot of things. But is that especially a challenge for some families who might already have issues accessing mental health support, resources, those kinds of things, and how do we help them overcome that?
Yeah, it is harder, I think, because what I do a lot in my programs with the online programs is take people through, like, the advice is there and it's simple, and I think it's sometimes it feels like being healthy. There's lots of information about there, but it really, what it comes down to is eating healthy food and moving our bodies, and it's just the consistency of doing that that gets there. That's not fun. It's not, it's hard work. It's difficult. But that's, I'm kind of resigned to the fact that I need to do that, and I'll start it soon. But it's the same kind of thing for raising kids. But what can be really helpful is that um, connection with somebody who can listen to how you're going and help you problem solve the times when it's not working, and think about doing it a little bit differently, and maybe tailoring the advice to your particular child. So I think trying to have more support or access to support um, for people who need it is what helps, because the
Mm,
information's already out there. There's heaps of books, there's lots of stuff on the internet, but it's just actually having somebody almost like coach you through it so that you can change how you think about it and implement the strategies one by one.
yeah.
Yeah.
I
It's
know
hard doing anything alone.
it really is. It really is. And I know I mentioned earlier kind of the like you get the ability once you kind of have that diagnosis, once you've gotten to that point, you gain the ability to find other people who are going through a little bit of the same thing. Um, and that's one of the things that I think online communities are great for is just connecting you in with those people who might have heard of a different resource than what you've been provided. And
Hmm.
they're like, "Have you checked out this website? Have you checked out this book? Can you go find it in your library? Can you, here, I've got a copy. Let me send it to you." Those kinds of things. And just being able to connect, I think that connection piece is really what has helped me in so many different ways. And just being able to be like, okay, here's what's going on. Has anyone else had a similar issue? And most of the time,
Hmm.
yes.
Yep.
But those online resources, even if it's not a group that you're connecting in with, even if it's just going in and saying, like, okay, let me just do a Google search on this issue, or let me go to this website and see what there is for me. it really makes a big difference.
Yeah, yeah. Even things like, if there's some organizations, we have some great ones in Australia where you can subscribe to a newsletter so that you get little tips in small bite-sized chunks and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. We've touched on it
Mm.
a little bit, but what roles do schools and teachers and even communities play in fostering an inclusive kind of growth environment for children?
I think they play a big role because kids are at school for a long time. It's lots of hours in the week that they're there. Um, and I often try and talk to parents about it, like imagine, a job where you feel like you fit in and you have the support and resources that you need to do your job, and compare that then to someone where you feel like the boss really doesn't like you and everything's just not quite set up how you like it, that your experience and happiness is going to be wildly different. So I think having the right school fit just affects general well-being quite a lot.
Mm,
And then it's instrumental in changing or setting up how well kids can learn, which is really important at school. And the better they can learn, the more they easy it is to kind of build on their learning year on year. So it makes a really big difference. And I think, as I often suggest to families if they're not sure about it, is to go and visit a school and you kind of get a feel for what it's really like. And um, I think the culture of the school and how supported kids feel, and how we have a term, it's called psychologically minded, how psychologically minded teachers are, which really means how good they are at connecting with people and meeting their needs, is probably a lot more important than how they teach the academics for kids who are developing differently.
yeah. I know whenever I was looking at schools where I moved to, I emailed the districts in the area and I was like, "Hey,
Hmm.
I've got two kids, both of them have unique needs. How does your district handle this, this, and this?" Like I sent them a list of questions and I said, "I want to know what you do for this. I want to know what you do for this. I want to know what you do for this. And how is your student body and your teacher body? Uh, how are they with students who are a little bit different?" And you
Hmm.
would not believe the atrocious responses I got. Keep in mind, I am in Texas, so there's that. But I got some atrocious responses from some of the districts. I immediately reached out to my real estate agent, and I was like, I will not move to a house in this school district or this school
Hmm.
district. Mark that off the list. I don't care how good of a deal. I don't care if it's a dollar house and perfectly
Yeah.
meets everything else. We're not moving there. And I wound up in the school district that we're in now, and I'm so happy with the way that they have been. But if I hadn't reached out and asked those questions, and they were very simple. I wasn't asking anything huge. Um, but yeah, you got to reach out and ask the questions. If you're worried about it at all, it's worth just asking because they'll be honest.
Yeah.
At least here, they were brutally honest.
Right. Yep. And it really gives you, even if they said, "What do you mean?"
Hmm.
or "No, nothing,"
There's your
that gives
answer.
you a load of information. Yeah.
Yeah, it
Yep.
really does. It really does. And I've been really happy with some of the other programs in the area as well, and just our general neighborhood and the kids in the area. It really does make a big difference if your kid feels like they have friends. And I also know for my kid, at least my youngest, he likes to have friends outside of school, and so not just
Hmm.
kids that he sees every day, but he sees them in some other activities and everything, and it makes a big difference for him at least.
Yeah. Yep.
I don't know how it is in Australia. I'm sure it's different. I'm sure it's better than it is here. But how can parents advocate effectively for their kids, especially in school settings or when seeking support from like a medical professional or a mental health counselor or something like that?
It's interesting. I don't know if it would be better here or not, but because sometimes what we use here is American legislation about access
Mm,
to disability supports. I think it's IDEA, maybe. You might not know, but yeah. So we use that as a means to advocate for children being able to get what they need at
mm,
schools. Um, we have a system here where every or children with additional needs have an individual education plan. And so that's a really great way to advocate for your child and what they need. And so I always say too to have a meeting or a team approach to those things. Often kids will have a couple of other people in their lives, whether it's a counselor or psychologist, an occupational therapist, and trying to collaborate and building that team around you can help because the team will advocate for you and your child as well. Um, so that's a really good way to do it. And then just try and keep in touch with the school and ask them about, the progress towards these things and what data they're using or basing their decisions on. Um, and then if you're going to see somebody like medical or allied health professional, bringing information to them is a great idea. I've got lots of parents who will come with a list of things because it's not always easy to remember everything for the appointment. But if you can um, kind of talk about what your concerns are and then what you're hoping to get out of support for your child, and then you can list off lots of the behaviors or things that you notice that you're not sure about. um, that's a good way to do it, and get a second opinion, I guess, if you feel like you weren't heard or listened to.
mm.
You've got to have somebody in on your team that you feel like there's trust there.
I know we have an IEP as well, that independent education plan for kids in schools if they need some accommodations or something. I'm glad to hear you say like bring your list because I am a list person and I do take my lists
Hmm.
and I'm like I wrote down these things because once I'm in that room, I am not going to remember half the things that I wanted to talk about. Or I'm going to feel like, oh, I'm taking up too much time, or I'm imposing, or they don't want to hear every little detail. But I learned that whenever my grandfather got his cancer diagnosis, and my grandmother was like, can you please go with us to all of the doctor's appointments because I am breaking down and
Mm.
I'm not going to remember anything that's said and those kinds of things. And so I went with the lists because we talked about it ahead of time. And I was like, all right, what questions do y'all have so I can make sure they get asked? And that really helped prepare me to go in. And now I always take a list. I have
Hmm.
no shame about it anymore. But every now and then I'd be like, boy, is this really annoying? Never mind, I don't care.
Yep. No, for me, it's never annoying. And parents say, "Oh, I've got this report and that report. Would that be helpful?" And I say, "Anything you send me, I'll read. I'll decide if it's going to be helpful or not. If you've got it, I'll always read everything. Because the more information, the better." Yeah,
I am
I
so
love a
glad
good
to hear you
list.
say
So,
that. Yes.
yeah, yeah.
Yep, yep. Now, this is a big question, but how can society as a whole better support kids with developmental differences and their families?
It is a big question. I think we're getting better at it, society as a whole. I think there's a lot more acceptance of people being different now than there was when I was a child, and
Hmm.
and probably way more than, my parents' generation as well. Um, but I think what hasn't quite happened yet is the change in the systems. So we still accept that people can be different, but we're trying to put everyone in the same school environment that just doesn't quite work. So I think maybe a little bit more flexibility around things like learning, and child care and support. Change in the system would be useful. I just had a thought, but it's just dipped out of my brain. Hopefully, it'll come back.
Yeah, if it's important, it'll return for sure.
Yeah, yeah.
We talked a little bit about just kind of how it can feel pretty overwhelming to parents, and it's hard to pinpoint what you should do differently as a parent. What advice would you give someone who has that feeling of being overwhelmed or unsure or of kind of where to start when they notice that, hey, my child might need some additional support? What would you say?
I think that, and you've mentioned this a little before, but I think getting some support for an assessment that might help with the diagnosis is probably the first step, because you need to know what the difference is in order to be able to support your child in the best way. It's quite common that things get a little bit, it's not easy for parents to tell, I think, what the differences might be. And so you might notice that your child's not quite or developing differently, but it's hard to tease out, is it ADHD? Is it autism? Or is it something? Anxiety is the other one that kind of,
Yeah.
the three A's, it's really common that it's one of those, or one or more than one. So getting a good assessment, and if there's a diagnosis or not, making that decision is probably the first step, because then I think you can find lots of the resources out there, and that's a good thing to do. But then, if once you've gone that process, I think that's where I'd say think about what it is that your child needs right now in that moment, and try and just put in place something for that one thing. So, for example, if your child has got a lot of, anxiety, and maybe it's seeing a psychologist, or if your child seems to be doing um, really well but can't follow instructions and that kind of stuff at home, maybe just putting in place lots of visual information which will support at home. So it's really about what they need right now, and what that next step is, and go from there.
Yeah, pick one thing to address at a
Yeah.
time. Yet, if you don't want to
Yeah.
jump in and be like, all right, we got to change our whole lives in one day. that, that's
Yeah.
stressful, not only for parents, but also for the kids. I mean, that really is. Even if it's something that in the long run is going to be helpful for them, changing everything overnight is overwhelming for everyone involved. I know
Yeah.
whenever I was talking about all of this with my youngest, like I said, he was 4 whenever we first saw his neurologist, and it was overwhelming. It was very overwhelming because now all of a sudden, even after getting that diagnosis, now all of a sudden I'm going Google crazy and reading
Hmm.
all of this stuff and like, okay, here's things that could help, here's things that could help, here's things that could help. And I did have to be like, hold on, take a step back because you can only do one thing at a time.
Yep.
It's easy to say I got to change everything.
Yeah. Yep. It is. And I often will say to parents too that you don't have to do it all at once.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, because we think parents want to do the best for their child.
Yeah.
And so they're thinking, okay, there's 5 things I could do to help. I want to do them all. But if you mentioned it, that it's like, if it's too much for a child, if it's too much for a parent, it's too much for a child. And so if you're putting in, but sorry, I'm going all over the place here. I think it can be too much for children sometimes to try and work on lots of things at once. But if it's too much for parents as well, that is stressful.
Yeah.
And if a child's relying on a parent who then is quite stressed and more emotional and not able to be there as much, then that's no good for the child either. So sometimes by doing all of these things, you kind of not exactly getting more benefit, because you're kind of stressing everyone out, and no one can learn when they're stressed out. So one thing at a time, I think, is great. And then if you've got that running smoothly, then you'll reach a place where you feel like you've got the capacity to do something else.
Yeah. I suspect the other line of thinking, because that you talking made me think of this as well. So this, I could be totally wrong, but was the other line of thinking you were like, if you implement all 5 things at once, you don't know which one really helped? Was that kind of where you were headed a little bit?
It wasn't, but that's a good point.
Okay, well,
That's a good point. No, yeah, no, I'm just thinking about the stress of it all.
yeah,
What I was thinking was kind of like, also, if it's too hard for you, because each thing you do, say if you see an OT and a psychologist, and you know, they'll all have goals for you to work on. And if it's too much for you to keep a handle on as a parent, it's definitely going to be too much for your
Hmm.
child. Um, yeah, but you're right. You also won't know what helps if you do it all.
Yeah.
And so then you'll be stuck doing it all because you don't want to undo any progress.
Hmm.
Whereas if you do one thing at a time, it's much better.
Yeah. So we're coming to the kind of last couple of questions. So while we're getting there, if anyone in the chat has anything they would like to ask, I know that we had some interruptions earlier, and that is okay. But if there's anything that y'all want to ask, make sure you pop those in there, and we'll continue here. So, Leanne, what is your favorite life hack?
This is a good one. I think one of my books back here somewhere is Life Admin Hacks, which is awesome. But I think preparing ahead is probably my biggest life hack. Um, and it's not a specific one, but it's one where I notice if I'm feeling like it's a busy week or it's more stressful, I'll ramp up how much I can prepare ahead, and it's making school lunches maybe 2 days ahead of time, and um, preparing what I'm going to wear the night before so that when I wake up, I'm just good to go. So kind of, yeah, trying to prepare ahead. I'm often say like, oh, thanks past Leanne, or thanks yesterday, Leanne, because when I do that, it really helps me out the next day. So yeah, that's what I do, is trying to minimize the stress then each day so I can still do what I need to do, but in a calm way. Um, yeah,
You mentioned
that
the
would
book
be my
Life Admin Hacks. Is that the one by Mia Northrup and Dinah Rowe Roberts? Is that right?
yes,
Okay, good.
yeah, that's right.
All right,
Yep,
I'm
so there's
gonna
so
add
many
that.
hacks in there, and yeah, they've got lots of systems and downloadable kind of checklists and things to try and do everything like, you know, for example, get rid of all your paper clutter, and actually one of the authors, I can't remember which one, but has a separated family, so her kids go across two homes as well. So lots of systems about how to try and do that communication and stuff. So it's an awesome book.
Oh, that's great. Well, I just added it and I posted a
Mm.
link if anybody else wants to see if that is something that they're interested in reading. Feel free to check out that link. This is not for you. He thinks that I opened the treats drawer and I did not. This is my magic wand. If you could wave a magic wand and eliminate one common opinion or misconception surrounding mental illness, disabilities, or talking about mental health, what would it be?
It would be that that people with disability or mental health challenges are less than other people. Because I think there's a lot of messaging around that, and it comes through then as shame for people who
Yeah,
have those things, and it's what leads to not wanting to talk about it, which is a barrier to seeking help. So yeah, I would really try and I would love for us to all see it as a difference that's not something that is less than others.
absolutely. Well, I'm
Mm.
going to post your socials one more time. So if anyone wants to connect with you, they can do so through those links. And I'll just kind of open it up to you. Anything you want to talk about that we didn't cover while I'm doing that, feel free to just take the floor for a minute.
I think we have covered quite a lot of things today. Let me see. I think really my main message is to try and convey that understanding your child and who they are and what they need, and meeting their needs. It doesn't mean catering to everything. It just means, um, within the bounds of discipline and boundaries, giving them what they need to learn and develop and become independent is what can really set them up well for being teenagers and then into adulthood, and give them the best chance at being able to be a um, happy adult who can be independent and on their own. So yeah, that's my goal, to help all parents be able to know how to do that by being able to access information and some support with, parent coaching or tailoring the strategies. Yeah, you don't have to be perfect. It's just about doing that as much as you can. Um, yeah, that's the summary, I think, for me.
I love that. It's a great summary and it's a great goal. And I mean, to have that be the work that you love to do and have that be your passion is you are doing just such a great thing. And I hope that all of your clients tell you that they appreciate you all the time.
Well, thank you so much. Yeah.
Absolutely. Bite Mark says, I just want to say thanks so much for being here. It has been a fascinating conversation. And I echo that as well, Leanne. Thank you for taking the time. I know we had some technical difficulties.
Yeah.
I appreciate you letting me troubleshoot a little bit and set this up on the fly. And hopefully that wasn't too much of an issue.
Yeah, no, not for me. So I really appreciate you and the listeners as well for hanging in there through that. But Mama, I'm really impressed that you could pivot like that on the fly to come up with a second solution. And yeah, I think if you take that approach in your parenting, you will be fine.
I
No big deal, I
definitely
can fix it.
I definitely do take that approach to parenting and life in general, and then that anxiety will kick in later and I'll overthink everything. But definitely in the moment, it's like, all right, what's our next step? Let's do that.
Yep,
Great.
yep, yep. So here's where you use the preparation time, the life hack, and just plan something nice for yourself later when you do have that anxiety, and just, yeah,
I like that.
look
I
after
like that.
yourself.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Leanne, for being here. This has been a beautiful conversation. I appreciate you so much taking the time.
You're so welcome. Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for listening to this episode of Even Tacos Fall Apart. I really appreciate you sticking with us through the tech hiccups and all. That is real life, and around here, we just roll with it. Talking with Leanne was a solid reminder that parenting doesn't come with a manual, and there's no one-size-fits-all approach, especially when you're raising a kid with ADHD, autism, anxiety, or anything else that doesn't follow the standard playbook. What really stuck with me is how much of this work is about shifting our perspective, understanding that behavior is often communication, that our kids aren't giving us a hard time, they're having a hard time, and that we as parents deserve support too. It can be overwhelming when you're trying to figure out what's going on with your child, or if you feel like the school or the doctor isn't hearing you. But as Leanne said, you don't have to change everything overnight. You don't have to be a perfect parent. You just need to take that next step, whatever it looks like for you and your family. Maybe today that's making a list before your next doctor's appointment. Maybe it's looking up resources online or asking your kid's teacher a few more questions. Maybe it's just giving yourself a break and saying, I'm doing the best I can with what I've got. Because honestly, that's enough. If this conversation spoke to you, or if you know someone who's going through something similar, please share this episode. And if you haven't already, take a second to like, subscribe, and leave a review or a comment on your favorite podcast platform. It really helps other people find the show and join this community. People who need to hear that they are not alone in what they're going through. You can find the links we mentioned in the show notes, including how to connect with Leanne and check out some of her free resources for parents. And if you want to support this podcast further, head over to tacosfallapart.com to find ways that you can do that. Follow me on social. I'm MommaFoxFire everywhere. Every little bit helps keep this going. Until next time, remember, even when everything feels like it's a mess, you're doing more than you think. And I love you. Take care.